So maybe we're not even going to have to work pretty soon, right? I mean, we've got artificial intelligence doing all the intelligence stuff, right? The white collar stuff. We've also got robotics that are being paired with AI. You've got people like Elon Musk who are obviously at the forefront of a lot of this stuff, saying things like, we're kind of in a post-scarcity economy, or we're about to be. It's right around the corner. Basically meaning we usually think of the economy in terms of scarcity. So there's always something that we need labor to be directed at because not everybody can do it themselves, right? It's a hot commodity to be able to want to, have somebody build me software, for the barista to give me a coffee, for whatever it is. There's there's limited resources, there's limited talent, there's only so many people, there's always a scarcity, there's always a bottleneck. There's always problems that need solving, and the economy is set up to direct labor at those problems. And if you're one of the people who can direct your labor at that problem, you get paid for it. That's the whole point. But you have people like Elon Musk saying, maybe we're heading into this kind of post-scarcity era because AI is going to kind of just do everything, right? I mean, again, this is not just the usual automation that you get on the assembly line. This is stuff like, doing what lawyers do, doing what doctors do, arguably even better. Maybe we're not there yet, but it's right around the corner. Why wouldn't it be, right? AI is coming in and doing these massive correlations between symptoms and disease, or lifestyle and health outcomes, legal precedent and case law, whatever it is, right? AI can come in and do this. It can think similar to humans, maybe better than humans, maybe soon, far better, maybe it'll be super intelligent. So what happens to the economy? Like, do we even really need people to do anything? And this kind of touches on issues of UBI, universal basic income, a little bit, which I think Musk has mentioned as well. Because, if we're all going to sit around like a bunch of Aristotles, right, and just kind of philosophize, there's not really much else to do. We might as well just get paid an income, which would be supported by, I guess, the robotics and the AI. They're doing the agriculture, they're doing the doctoring and the lawyering. It's all taken care of. So we just need a universal basic income, and we can sit down and just kind of have that pleasant life, I guess. You can do whatever you want. Now, ethics and morality aside, whether that even makes sense, whether that's actually good for humans, just from an economic standpoint, I'm going to argue in this episode that actually, and scientifically, this doesn't really add up because there's little reason to believe that scarcity just disappears. I'd say it's far more likely that scarcity actually relocates. And I'll get into what that means. But the basic idea, if it's not obvious already, is that, as we innovate and as we solve problems, we're basically just expanding the space of problem solving. And there's always new problems around the corner. In fact, there's often even more than there was before. And I'll explain some of the science and the mechanics behind why that is. But that's what you can expect. And it's not that scarcity disappears. It actually just relocates. And so I don't think we're going to enter, with artificial intelligence automation, a post-scarcity economy. I think there's going to be bigger challenges ahead, more possibilities, and basically I don't think the jobs are going to disappear, I guess is what I'm really saying. And I can understand people thinking that, right, with AI automation, like, are jobs just going to disappear? Or are they going to just take a lot away? Because we see the precedent for that with automation, right? The horse was no longer needed when cars came along. Not as many people needed to be, I guess, in the plant, when the assembly line, whatever. There's all this, technology is always going to displace labor. That is true. But the problem is thinking of labor as just this kind of finite resource, and you have so much of it. And if you have something hacking away at it, a new type of technology, a new type of automation, that there's just less jobs to go around. But that's not really what you see historically. Okay, so anyways, So we understand problem solving, we understand value creation, right? We understand that an economy basically runs off the notion of scarcity. And as long as there's something scarce resource, you can direct labor towards it, and people can have jobs and people can make money and they can feel fulfilled. But here's, now I want to lay out kind of the science behind why you should expect the scarcity to be relocated, not just kind of washed out by automation. So when we solve a problem, we being humans, right, what ends up happening is this kind of encapsulation. So meaning, let's say you're working in software and it's kind of low-level programming, and it'd be a lot better if you didn't have to write all the lines of code, if you could kind of operate at a higher level. And so what happens, and what has happened all throughout the history of software development, computer programming, is this encapsulation. I'm going to bundle up these 10,000 lines of code, and that's only going to make, and it's going to bring it down to, let's say, 2,000 lines of code. And so now, people can just develop software more effectively. This happens in all types of technology. I mean, even like the stone axe, right? If you go all the way back, you can imagine you've got these kind of different parts you had to do. I got to go carve the, the flint or the sharp stone, and then I got to bind it and, maybe to some kind of a handle, and I got to use it like this. But if you bring all that together into one encapsulated piece, and we just call it the axe, now the problem is just to grab the axe and do that to do something, right? To do the same thing quicker, or as we'll see, even open yourself up to new problems that you didn't even think were there, didn't know were there, or that, new solutions that you just didn't think were feasible, right? So we do this with technology all the time. We encapsulate it, we bundle it up, we create a component, and then the new stepping stone, the building piece, kind of the new starting point of building, is that encapsulated module. Now it's not the individual different pieces of rock that were sharp in this, and it was just the axe. It's not the 10,000 lines of code. It's just the 2,000 lines of code. It's not whatever it is, right? You can even go take a look at, some of the rocket improvements on the Falcon engines, whatever that Musk is working with, and it looks so much simpler now, right? The what's happening here is as we solve problems, we don't just solve it, we bundle it up and we create a new level of abstraction, right? Abstraction is just a higher level thing that essentially bundles up the lower level pieces. Obviously in language, we usually think of abstraction as being kind of just a mental thing. So if I'm going to look at all the different breeds of dog, right? And you've got the poodles and you've got the Rottweilers and you've got the Dobermans and whatever, but the abstraction is just dog. And if I just say dog, it includes all those underlying details, right? Well, we do this with technology. There's physical abstraction, right? Whether it's the stone axe, whether it's the new rocket engine, the new programming language that allows you to write way less code than the previous programming language that it bundled up. Okay, these are abstractions, right? And you operate on those abstractions. So we're solving problems, and there's always the bottleneck, which is, what people are working on. Like, this is not easy to do. We direct labor towards it. Then we kind of we bundle things up, and we create a new abstraction with it. And I'll tie this back to labor in a second. So that new abstraction, what that is actually like an interface. It's an interface into the world of problem solving, because now I can take the abstraction and I can use that to move into the world of possibility to solve all kinds of new problems. So think about like literally the graphical user interface in computing, right? It's a really good example. Prior to that, people had to do a lot of low-level stuff, right? If you wanted to manage files, you would basically have to understand, I guess, the command line, how to move files, writing, really kind of cryptic commands. You'd have to be a pretty big computer nerd just to use computers. And then came along the GUI, the graphical user interface, with icons, right? Windows, and everything was just very intuitive. And so if I wanted to move a file, I was literally just dragging it across the screen. I didn't need to know anything about programming or commands or operating systems. It was very, very intuitive, very natural, right? That's an interface. But not only does it allow, let's say me, let's say early 90s, you're starting to use the graphical user interface. Now someone like me can use computers. It's not just for dragging files around. Now I can use computers to do things, right? Maybe I'm a sound engineer. I can actually use computing to accelerate and solve new problems and find new solutions in the area of science, of audio engineering, right? If I'm a graphics designer, I could use computing for that. If I'm trying to manage my company and there's, demand pipelines, whatever, right? It wasn't something that, you got to go hire some nerd who can write some low-level stuff and you can try to automate this. Now it was everyday people who could interface with these systems, right? I mean, even just like the Excel spreadsheet, right? Just organizing something through an interface. So the interface is what brings you into the world of possibility, right? And of course, this drives the cost down for doing the thing in the first place. So you think about like the resources needed to solve a problem, the resources needed to automate something, whatever it is, the cost comes way down. Everything gets kind of, not everything, but in this space, whatever's being solved, it gets democratized, it gets cheap. You don't have to be rich to do it. You don't have to be particularly smart necessarily to do it, by whatever definition of smart happens to be high at the time. It just opens the door to more people. So now you've got way more people doing the thing, right? Graphics design maybe was this really kind of esoteric, only so many professionals could do it. Now you got a lot of people coming in that can do graphics design. A lot of people can do things with writing. A lot of people can do things. Just from the graphical user interface alone, it opened up the world to computing. And because computing was powerful, they could do so much with it. So a lot of different people interacting. And what they're doing now is is from the story that I'm telling, if you take the interface, whether it's a graphical one or whatever, the abstraction, right, the encapsulated bundle up new starting point of technology, if you take that, it's not even just making the one thing easier. Now you're combining it with the other interfaces, the other abstractions that have been created, the other things that have been bundled up and encapsulated. And so you get all these combinations of things. So what's happening here is you're getting this kind of combinatorial explosion of possibilities. And the way you should think about this is the problem space is now expanding dramatically. Okay, so starting to think, going back to this idea of, a post-scarcity society, it's almost like all problems have kind of been solved. There's not a lot left to do. That's why maybe there's not going to be jobs, and maybe we need, UBI or whatever it is. Not that that's the only case for universal basic income. I'm just kind of adding that on there. But that kind of thinking, right? Like if everything's done and AI is taking care, but that's not the story of how technology and problem solving works, right? The story is we're working on problems, there's bottlenecks, you jump on the bottleneck, you solve it, you encapsulate it, you package it up into a physical abstraction. The physical abstraction presents an interface. The interface moves you into the world of expanding problem solving, right? Combinatorial, so many things combined, so many things are possible. Way more people can work on that same thing that, 5-10 years ago you needed to be a professional for. What's happening is the ballooning out, the expanding of the number of problems that could be solved. Okay. So that doesn't sound like, the problems that we have to solve are a shrinking pie, right? It's actually blowing it out. It's actually expanding it way more. Now we have problems that before we thought were not feasible, now they can be reached, right? I mean, again, you just think about, computing as being such a good example. Start super low level, right? Then you start to rise that up with new programming languages. Then you get into scripting languages. And I'll give some more examples in a bit. But you just keep rising it and raising it. And more people can contribute. And so you're getting this combinatorial explosion of possibilities. That possibility space, I think for this episode, I'll call it the problem space. The problem space, the space of possible problems we could attack just explodes. There's way more you can do. So all the things that were not feasible before, well, not all, a lot of the things that we thought were not feasible before, by virtue of this combination of abstractions, allows us, right, these higher level tools allows us to approach them and actually work on them. Obviously, that's going to lead to new jobs. Obviously, that's going to be a relocation of scarcity, because that's what that is. Right now, something new is scarce. Right now, it's, now it's not writing the commands to the operating system. That's already been bundled up and encapsulated. Now, what it is the people who know how to use interfaces really well to, create really good spreadsheets. Now, and whatever example you want to use, right? The scarcity gets relocated, and that is what you see historically, and that's what makes sense scientifically. Not only are the problems that maybe we thought not feasible in the near future become feasible, and that just explodes, it's also problems that we weren't even thinking about. And I think this is the real point, right? It's also problems that we didn't even know existed, right? Either because I guess they got invented, right? Because now we have the new problem of people using this higher level technology to do this that never existed before, or we just discovered something, right? We discovered something that's brand new, and this opens up a brand new space, right? And, if you got a bunch of vehicles that can be driven around as cabs, now we've got this cab driver thing. And that's what a lot of people need to go do. Now we've got user interfaces in computing, and now we need people, whatever, like all the examples you could think of, right? It just explodes out into problems that we knew were not feasible, but problems that we didn't even know existed, and just new discoveries, and it just kind of keeps going and going. And so what this is really a story of of scarcity relocation. So I'm calling it relocation because it's not scarcity was one thing. It was in the economy. There was always a bottleneck to solve, and there was this demand for it. And now some new technology comes in, and that shrinks and shrinks and shrinks and disappears. It was like this, like almost like scarcity itself was a finite resource, and it just shrank into nothing. And now there's nothing left to do. It doesn't add up, that story, to how we know, to what we know about innovation, how we understand the evolution of technology, and even just historically when we look at the economy, right? That just hasn't been the case. Overlaps a little bit almost with the Malthusian thing, right? You got Malthus saying, there's only so much resources, and eventually the population is going to strip that out, and that there's just not enough food, let's say, to feed everybody. But of course, you got the Haber process, you got all this innovation that came along in agriculture. All of a sudden, we could make way more food, way more innovation, right? Malthus never took in the Malthusian trap, if you will. It never took into account how innovation actually happens and the problems that it solves. It's kind of like that, right? There's little reason to believe it runs out. There are counter arguments to that, right? There is this notion that the amount of time it takes to come up with the next innovation seems to be getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So what if there's like kind of a decaying process where eventually, we do run out of the ability to innovate fast enough to tackle the problems? But that's kind of a different issue, right? That's not really the resource. I mean, even in that case, you're actually talking about more problems coming to you that need solving. So when it comes to AI taking jobs, it just doesn't fit into that, right? The real picture is, I would argue, the scarcity relocation. So let's just use some examples. I talked about the graphical user interface, right? The core kind of mechanism I want to communicate in this episode is the notion that when you raise the abstraction level, it gives you this interface that moves you into the space of problem solving, right? And expands out because of the combinations, but also because of you as an individual have the ability to do the thing now, right? There's way more things you can do now because the technological innovation has given you a tool to do something that you would have had to have spent 10 years in school to do 10 years ago or whatever, right? You're far more capable to do. It's not the same people, right? Like the people that were really good, I don't know, calculators before are not the same people today that use calculators really effectively, right? The people who were managing data 10 years ago, that might not be the people who are good at managing data today, because what it means to manage data is a very different thing, because high-level tools have now empowered different people, the same people sometimes, but also different people and more people, right? Because it's democratized to solve these problems. So the graphical user interface is an example. It all comes down to the interface. Think about, again, in computing, you've got APIs, application programming interfaces. This is where we basically, you can kind of throw things over the wire. Like you think about SaaS, right? Software as a service. So many of the products that we subscribe to online, they get a lot of their capabilities by basically calling something over the internet where all the capabilities are taking advantage of is kind of bundled up. So for example, if I'm going to release a SaaS product and I want billing in there, I can just easily take advantage of Stripe, which handles all the payments and the refunds and the whatever window that you need to open to kind of manage your own payments and manage your subscription. If that didn't exist, right, I would have to write all that code myself. I have to do everything, and I have to understand how it connects maybe to banks and it would just be this, it's its own specialty. It's its own huge thing. But Stripe bundles all that up and just exposes the capability through the API. And then me building a piece of software just taps into the API. Now I can bring payments into my software. And there's so many examples. I mean, we do this with AI now. You call the AI, I don't need my own large language model, right? I call the AI capability through API endpoints. Programming languages in general is just such a story of this increasing encapsulation via abstraction, right? First, it was machine code, took forever to write the most basic thing. Then, C++ and C languages, and then scripting like Python and JavaScript. And it just keeps going higher and higher, right? Integrated circuits are another example, right? Now you can, think about like Raspberry Pis and stuff like this. You can bring integrated circuits. You can match them with motors. You can match them with sensors. You can build your own things. I don't need to be, have direct access to some manufacturing plant that does integrated circuits. You can just buy them off the shelf. You can mix and match them. You can create your own robotics. These frontier models and artificial intelligence is obviously the best example today. right? Think about what you can do. Think about sitting in front of, a ChatGPT, or a Claude, and you want to do your taxes. And before it was like, well, maybe I got to contact my accountant, or maybe I'm using like a TurboTax thing or something, whatever the software is. But now it's like I can get the chatbot to really understand my situation, especially for something, let's say like a business, right? Maybe I've operating a company maybe in this country and in this country, and there's kind of this dual thing going on, but I've also got it's just a mess. I don't care about tax. I mean, I have to pay it, but I don't want to be an accountant myself. You can give all that context to a single AI chatbot now, hopefully without leaking any private information. And it can understand where you are and what your situation is and what you need to do, what you need to file. I mean, that's amazing, right? So again, now you're empowering, right, someone like me, but that's an interface. It's an interface into the world of accounting that I never would have been able to enter before, or at least it would have taken a long time to enter because I don't want to be an accountant. I don't care about tax, right? It's that kind of thing. Let's think about biology, just so you understand this is not just a technology thing, right? Think about the cellular membrane in biology. So prior to cells and cellular membranes, prior to having a boundary between the internal chemistry and everything that was outside of it, it was just the internal chemistry. Okay, so there's only so much you could do with life if the chemistry of life is just completely exposed to the environment. But once evolution arrived at a cell membrane that selectively chose what can pass and what cannot pass into that internal chemistry, way more things became possible, because now it's like you had these modules that could be mixed and matched to create far more complex versions of life, right? And so we can have, muscle tissue and organs and multicellular organisms because things were bundled up and encapsulated to create an interface which allowed that life chemistry to move into a much larger problem space, right, and solve more things, right, attack more bottlenecks in the chemistry of life. DNA itself, right, similar kind of story. You package everything up, evolution packages all the information necessary into this single long-stranded molecule, and then packages that up further, let's say into something like a genome, right, get into all the genetics, whatever it is, however you want to think about it. Right. Again, the information capacity of life is now way more complex because of the way things get packaged up and reused. Right. So it's not so at some level, DNA is kind of almost all the same. Right. It's the same idea. You got the ACTG bindings, right? Nucleogenic base pairs. There's a standard kind of template. Right. The sequences aren't the same for all organisms, but the template is the same, and that template keeps getting reused. That reuse is what leads to the complexity, right? So you solve way more problems. And of course, that's what nature is doing with multicellular organisms, is it's solving a whole new host of challenges related to survival, right? The badger is solving all kinds of survival problems that, an amoeba can't solve, right? So levels of complexity. The nervous system, right? Think about all the kind of lower level unconscious activities or decisions that the body would need to make individually if it wasn't for something like the nervous system, right? Heartbeat, right? The way your muscles move, breathing, all this kind of stuff. Higher level brain functions can coordinate that because it all goes through the interface of electrical activity, right? It all goes through a kind of standardized interface that allows the massively complex dexterity, right? Breathing, heartbeat regulation. There's no way you could coordinate that all individually. It has to go through a standardized interface where everything is done in terms of electrical signals. So now the brain can coordinate that essentially at an unconscious level. Think about flowers, right? The difference between plants and flowers. The plant originally had to rely just on things like wind and water movement for reproduction. The flower on top of that plant, or as part of that plant, now provided a interface so that pollinators could come in and now help with the spreading of whatever, right? The pollen and eventually the seeds, so that reproduction in plants could happen far more effectively, right? So nature is doing this all the time. It's solving harder and harder problems because levels of physical abstraction are raised, provides an interface into the space of possibilities, right? Language is such a good example, right? All the complexities of the human mind is hidden within the skull of an individual unless you have language. With language, especially written language, where we can write that down, that's an interface into the thoughts of others. People can now kind of get motivated by the thoughts and recombine things into new creations. That's very much all of our culture and all of our writing and all of our technological innovation, none of that would be possible if we didn't have something like language with which to interface and allow the human thoughts to combine in a fantastically complex fashion. So, is AI going to take our jobs? I don't think so, because I think there's more than enough reason to believe that with just that the technological innovation that AI represents is just going to relocate the scarcity. It's not going to remove it. You would have to remove scarcity for the jobs to go away because there's nothing left for people to solve. There's nowhere to direct the labor. There's no such thing anymore as certain people can do this and other people can do that. It's, the notion of an innate or learned talent wouldn't even make sense anymore. That sounds like a pretty depressing future, quite frankly, but I don't think it's the future because of all the reasons that I've just expressed. Looking at it scientifically, looking at it as a system, looking at how innovation has historically happened, right? We should expect the scarcity to relocate. I don't think the post-scarcity world makes sense. I could be wrong. I don't think so, though. I think it's going to relocate. There's going to be jobs for things that we didn't even know existed 5 years from now, 10 years from now. The stuff that we do know exists is going to be far more accessible to far more people, more combinations, right? Combinatorial explosion, the problem space expands. There might even be more jobs than there were before, right? Because that space is expanding. So anyways, that's all I want to talk about in this episode. You hear a lot about it. I just want to furnish you with some understanding, some mechanisms with which to view the so-called post-scarcity, debate. And maybe you had some intuition that doesn't seem quite right. Well, this is why I think that's not quite right. Anyways, thanks everyone for listening to this episode. And for those of you who are watching, you want to dig deeper into some of the science, go ahead and check out dekyon.io, dekyon.io. Go ask AI about the content that I produce. Go look at data visualizations for the concepts and how they're connected. Look at some techniques that you can develop to understand this stuff better. Go into the study space, go into the forum. There's all kinds of really great stuff that you can use to just understand these mechanisms, understand the science more effectively, and just join the community and talk about it and debate about it. All right, until the next one, take care.